Likewise, there's an interesting example which again many people have included in their works, and you will have all the references here, that we have been told that there's a famous hadith sharif recorded by Ibn Abbas, that if you're in a barren land or if you're in a jungle and you are traveling with animals, and for some reason your animal wanders off and you have no means of getting that animal back, then what Sayyidina Ibn Abbas hadith says, that you should say loudly, Ya ibadallah a'inuni, O servants of Allah, please help me. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has people, He has angels, and He has certain men on earth that you cannot see, Ibn Abbas explains, and they will help you to bring that animal back. So the actual dua is, Ya ibadallah, O servants of Allah, a'inuni, help me. So in reality, again, the dua is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who's going to give the power for that animal to come back to you. But again, it's through the means of whom? The pious servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this fact, this hadith is supported by the Quran itself, which talks about certain battles that happen, and Allah says, وَجُنُودًا لَمْ تَرَوْهَا, that in certain key battles, Allah helped the Muslims with armies that you cannot see, hidden armies on earth. This is mentioned from the Holy Quran, so this does not contravene the teachings of the Quran either. Imam Nawawi, you will know, is a very famous scholar. He wrote Riyadh al-Salihin, a very famous Shafi'i scholar. He writes that time and time again, our sheikhs and myself, that we have been in barren lands, and we have suddenly found that our camel wanders off or our animals wander off, and we have no means of finding them. And he says that we have tried this hadith and it has come true. That we have called, we have used this dua, and our animals have come back. And certainly I learned when I studied in Pakistan that when students used to go into exams, they would write Ya ibadallah a'inuni on the top of their exam papers. Because they used to say the same illah. They say that, you know, the barren land where no one can help you, you're out there and alone. Well, the exam is similar. That you're on your own now, no one else can really help you. And this is a practice that I picked up from them, and they taught me, and they used to write Ya ibadallah a'inuni. And this is something that continues to many of our Muslim brothers and students from Al-Azhar University, I know as well, they would write that on the top of their paper. Final example of istighas, of seeking the Prophet's wasila. Let me explain what wasila first is. Wasila means a medium. It means the means to something. It's not the end itself. So, for example, if I need to get to the airport, then the road is the wasila for me to get into the airport. If I need to buy something, or if I need to buy something from the shop, then the money is the wasila for getting that. It's the means to something. That is our understanding of it. How does wasila work in du'as? I'll give you a simple example from my own time. When we used to study in Darul Ulooms, and specifically in Jami al-Karam and Milton Keynes and in Eton, that in Darul Ulooms that we never used to work on school term times. Rather, it was the teacher, he would decide when the terms would start and when they would end. So the holidays, they were entirely up to the teachers. They would decide when the holidays are going to be. And for us students, this was a problem, because sometimes the teachers would be nice and give us holidays after 8 weeks and we could go home for a week. But sometimes it would be after 15, 16 weeks. And we would have no means of knowing when exactly the holidays are. Like in school, you know when your half term is, when your Christmas holidays in. We had no such concept. So what used to happen is we had to ourselves sometimes, because we used to get agitated and we wanted to go home homesick, we ourselves had to go up to the ustad and ask them that please give us a holiday for a week. In this situation, the worst and the lazy students never used to go to the teacher to ask. Because we knew straight away that the teacher's going to turn around and say, well, you ain't studying, I ain't going to give you a holiday. So what we used to do collectively is get together, and the best of our student, the cleverest one, the one that's been working hard, who's been doing the work on time, and who's been, you know, getting the right scores, we used to say to him that to go and ask the teacher for holidays. And then he would go forward, and he would say, the teacher would say that please give us holidays. This is what wasila is. You have a need, and your need lies with the teacher, and you choose to do it through the means of someone who is better than you. That is a basic understanding of what a wasila is. Now I know this is not a like-to-like example, but there's two key points that I want to mention about this example. Note that as students, we are not asking the brighter student to give us holidays. We're not saying to him, the student, the bright student, that please give us holidays. Can you imagine what would happen then, that if we said to, please give us holiday, and he gave us a holiday, and the teacher has no idea what's going on? We'd all get decked. We'd all be in trouble. That if the teacher finds out that his student is giving holidays without his authority, that all of us will be in big trouble here. Also note in this example that the teacher himself won't mind whether the lazy student comes or whether the bright student comes. Whichever comes, it's not an infringement on his authority. Whichever comes, it doesn't actually affect his authority. Both of them are his students. Both of them are his disciples. It won't actually affect his authority. So when we prayed, our du'as go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what we do is, for the sake that our du'as perhaps be accepted in a better light and more chances of acceptance, we put forward our best student, you could say, which is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we know, is the closest being to Allah. So we say that this is a means by which we can gain proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep that in mind. I will go through the examples of why wasila is not shirk, and it is ayn ibadat, and it is ayn part of tawheed. I'll give you 3 examples, although there are many examples to give. First example, before the time of the beloved Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam, before his time, before he actually physically appeared in this world, the famous example of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, and how he took the wasila of the Prophet. That you will know that when he committed the original sin, then when he came down to earth for many years, for a long period of time, that he sought forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah did not forgive him. But then eventually, he prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, Adam did not pray to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He prayed to Allah, but he said, بِحَقِّ نَبِيِّكَ, in the right of your Prophet, please forgive me. And then eventually, because of this dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave Adam alayhi salam. Example of the time during his life. A blind person came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, my sight has gone, that please pray for me that it returns. The Prophet gave him 2 choices. He said, have sabr. Have sabr in these days. Without your eyesight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you a great reward. Or I can pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure you. The blind companion said that it is very difficult for me to continue with my day-to-day life. There are very few people to help me. Please pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restores my eyesight. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told him to go away, perform wuzu well. He told him to perform some salah, 2 rakat salah. And this is the dua that he told him to read. Allahumma. The dua starts with, Oh Allah, inni as'aluka, I ask you, wa atawajjahu ilayk, and I turn to you. To who? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Binabiyyika Muhammadin nabiyyir rahmah, in the name of your Prophet, the Prophet of rahmah, of mercy. Ya Muhammad, O Muhammad, inni atawajjahu bika ila rabbi, I turn to you, towards my Lord, fi hajati hazihi, in my need, liyuqda li, so that you may fulfill it. Fashaffa' bi, so please make the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam an intercessor for me. Note again, this is ayn ibadat, because the dua is going to who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dua starts with Allahumma. So it's still a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something which the Prophet himself taught. Now it's conceivable that the Prophet will teach a dua in which shirk is being committed. It does not make sense in that sense. Likewise, and I will say that there is a famous book, Hisn Hasin, written by Ibn Ghazri. And Ibn Ghazri again has great favor amongst the Wahhabis. And this book here, is the foreword has been written by Maulana Rafiq, by Taqi Usmani, Maulana Taqi Usmani. He's actually written an introduction to this. And in that he has mentioned clearly that whoever, even today, if you have a need, and if you have a problem, then you should perform this same dua that I've just mentioned. And you take the wasila of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Third example is after the Prophet's time. The same dua that I read to you was used in the time of Sayyidina Usman as well. And why should this not matter? It doesn't matter whether the Prophet is physically in this world or after his life. Why? Because who is the dua to? It's to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ حَيٌّ لَا يَمُوتُ. And He is alive, He never dies. Your dua is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, isn't it? It's just through His wasila. So therefore it does not make any difference to how that actually happens. So in essence, a wasila is a means to something. Our wasila with the Prophet is a means to a greater end, which is our dua being accepted. He is not the end, but rather He is the means to it. Money is a means really, it's not the end. It's strange that in our society we worship money for the sake of it. It's just an end to other things really. Money is worthless, it's just paper really, it's just the means. When you go on holiday, the plane is the means to get there, it's not the end objective, is it? The end objective is to get to the holiday destination. So in exactly the same way, the dua is still going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing to contravene the basic understandings of Tawheed, that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Going on to the issue of ilm-e-ghaib. Earlier we heard how Albani believes that if anyone assumes that any other being other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ilm-e-ghaib, becomes a mushrik. Our understanding of it is very, very simple. That the ilm-e-ghaib that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam has is God-given. It is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's ilm-e-ghaib is His own. It is not earned, it is permanent, it is a permanent attribute of His. Whatever knowledge the Prophet has is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is infinite. There is no end to it. The Prophet's knowledge is finite. It's mahdud. It is limited. But how great that is, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. How great that is. So there is no, I fail to understand how this is a controversial subject in the first place, al-Mi'raj. That we understand from it that it's very simple. That the knowledge that Allah has given to the Prophet is vast and we will never fully comprehend it. But it is God-given. It is not his own, it is not his earned. So there can be no dispute in this whatsoever. And I'll just give you a very, very brief quote from Karam Shah rahmatullah alayhi, because it's very jami, it's very comprehensive, and it just summarizes our whole belief about it. Again, it's in the paper for you. Our belief is that Allah Almighty inundated the Prophet's heart with knowledge of the unseen, ilm-e-ghaib. However, the Prophet's knowledge in comparison to Allah's is not his own. It is given. Nor is it infinite. Rather, it is merely given from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's two great examples to explain everything now. In comparison to Allah's knowledge, the Prophet's knowledge is not even a particle of sand to the whole desert, or a drop in the ocean. It doesn't even, you can't even begin to compare Allah's knowledge with the Prophet's. In comparison to the knowledge of the rest of humanity now we're going to compare the Prophet's knowledge with our knowledge. The Prophet's knowledge is a huge ocean whose depths have not yet been explored and whose shores have not yet been reached. So I think this, simple as possible, explains our Aqeedah on that. So ilm-e-ghaib is not controversial at all. Tabarruk means to seek blessing from that. And earlier we heard that if you see the Mu'min Mubarak and you do dua with that, then that is shirk. Allah is the one who puts barakah in these things. He is the one that has created barakah in these things, and that is why we go to these things. It's not bottom up, it's top down. Allah has put the barakah in that place. He is the one who has put blessings in the hairs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in certain places and so forth. The example of Zamzam is the greatest example of tabarruk. This is just ordinary water until the point that the pious servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala touched it. The family of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. It is Allah that created the power, that great healing power in Zamzam. But it is done through the means of one of His pious servants.